Please stand as the family enters.
You may be seated. On behalf of the family, we thank you for joining us today, and all of you that are online that couldn't be with us because of this snowstorm. We feel your presence, and we're so glad that you're with us today. This morning is 3 or 4 hymns that we sing today will be recorded so that you can sing along with them, but they were Ruby's favorites, and so we'll start with one of those.
Encamped along the hills of light, ye Christian soldiers, rise and press the battle ere the night shall veil the glowing skies. Against the foe in vales below, let all our strength be hurled. Faith is the victory we know that overcomes the world. Faith is the victory. Faith is the victory, oh glorious victory that overcomes the world. His banner over us is love, our sword, the word of God. We tread the road, the saints above, with shouts of triumph trod. By faith they like a whirlwind's breast swept on o'er every field. The faith by which they conquer death is still our shining shield. Faith is the victory. Faith is the victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. On every hand the foe we find drawn up in dread array. Let tents of ease be left behind and onward to the fray. Salvation's helmet on each hand, with truth all girt about. The earth shall tremble neath our tread and echo with our shout. Faith is the victory. Faith is the victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. To him that overcomes the foe, white raiment shall begin. Before the angels he shall know his name confessed in heaven. Then onward from the hills of light, our hearts with love aflame will vanquish all the hosts of night. In Jesus' conquering name, faith is the victory. Faith is the victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world.
Well, it is good to be here today, and I know on behalf of all those that are watching online and here today, we just want you to know that our hearts are with you, and by our presence, we want you to know that we're asking God if we couldn't be in some way His hands of comfort and compassion at this time. Your family means so much to each of us, and there are many watching on our live stream as well that hearts are with you and would love to be here. So please know that your lives are very important to us, And sorry for the weather at times like this. God brings special people into our lives, and for many of us, that's exactly what your mom was. Your mom meant in so many ways. Ruby meant to us. And not only does he bring people into our lives, he journeys through life with us. Psalm 121 says, "I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore." And that was true for your mom, for Ruby, in so many ways. He watched over her coming and her going, and he does the same for us as well. He is that helper. Ruby Mae Mays passed away on January 21st, 2022, in San Antonio, Texas. She was born April 2nd, 1930, to Albert and Ethel Mae Rayburn Waller in Edmond, Oklahoma. Ruby was first a wife and mother dedicated to raising her young children. She married W.H. Buddy Mays, Jr. and attended business school and worked many years at the U.S. Rubber Company and Chew Cartage, utilizing her skills in shorthand, typing, and bookkeeping. As Ruby and Buddy became self-employed, she worked by his side, focusing on bookkeeping. Ruby was a lifelong member of the Edmond Church of Christ. For many years, she volunteered as the meal coordinator for the sick and families experiencing a loss. She also volunteered for the Search Program, Monday Night for the Master, and helped prepare items for the youth group trips to Mexico. During her retired years, she enjoyed spending time with her best friends who attended the weekly ladies' Bible class. Ruby and her twin sister Reba were inseparable, calling each other daily and caring for their older sister Laura. She enjoyed gardening and canning green beans, black-eyed peas, dilled okra, and pickles. She's known for her delicious roast and cherry pie. She shared her love for sewing with her daughters. Ruby is preceded in death by her husband, parents, sister Reba Brown and Laura Waller, and brother Verl Waller. She is survived by her son, Steve Mays, daughter Annette McKeever and husband Tim, daughter Janet Shaw and husband Richard, grandchildren Heather Mays, Andrew McKeever and wife Rachel, Caleb Shaw and wife Elizabeth, Casey Setzer and husband Derek, April Dryden and Cameron Shaw, great-grandchildren Jose Setzer, Harvey Shaw, Miles McKeever, and Addison Setzer. Wow, what a family. During the last 10 years of Ruby's life, her sense of humor, feistiness, smiles, and winks were prominent and loved by all she encountered. Her caregivers looked forward to those moments. Her life was about God, family, and friends. Ruby is remembered for her desire to help others, put her family before herself, and to the last day of her life, she would ask, "What do you need?" or "Can I help you?" In her memory, remember to give a wink and a smile. We are confident when God welcomed her into his arms, she gave him a smile and a wink. What a beautiful thought. Well, God obviously gave you a really special gift in her life, and he gave us that gift as well. But that gift of love also now brings grief at its loss. But I do hope you'll take those good memories and let them dwell in your hearts, where they can continue to be a blessing in your life and in the lives of all with whom you come in contact. I love the old quote that's attributed to Helen Keller. It says, "What we once enjoyed, we can never lose. All that we love deeply becomes a part of us." Well, I think that's true. And so there's much of her that is a part of who you are. Now, Ruby meant a lot to a lot of different people. For those that are watching online back in San Antonio from these last years, she touched many lives there. But here at the Edmond Church of Christ, you got to admit, she's very special to us in many ways. She is, well, I'm not for sure, but I can only think of two more that are living that attended the Edmond Church of Christ. We met in the gym theater. I could be wrong. We got a historian down here. There are more, there's three at least, two or three. Anyway, she's one of the last. And she loved those days and talked about them very much. And of course, when we think of Ruby around here at Edmond, we still think of Buddy. And they were quite the pair. I understand, I was told when Buddy passed that they met through a mutual friend. Ruby actually was dating that friend at the time, but eventually she and Buddy got together. And there's so many memories of the two of them together. She would tell how she could always tell when he was pulling up to get her because he didn't have any mufflers on his truck. She married Buddy when she was 19 and she was 18, and they were married for 67 years. What a team. Buddy used to call her his partner in life, and they were in so many ways. She would listen to him. They worked together. Her bookkeeping kept everything in good line, but he never had to worry about money as long as she kept an eye on it. And they were best of friends. I was told back in those days that Buddy and Ruby had a morning ritual they followed all those years. She would get him a cup of coffee, and they would sit in a chair and talk. And he did most of the talking, but it was their chance to talk and visit and begin their day. And the kids can vividly remember when they were children at night, hearing them lying in bed talking to each other. Of course, Ruby was famous here for her cooking, and not just here at church, but with the family as well. Her vegetables from the garden, her pecan pie or cherry pie. She was a wonderful cook, and Buddy, of course, loved her breakfast especially. He always said that she spoiled him. And one of his biggest goals those last years of his life was to make his little lady smile. He loved to make her smile. They have many memories. The family has a little book of memories that they wrote down from Ruby, and it's really fun to read. First date was probably to the Bronco or Jim. Left Jim for a show. She was 18, Dad was 19. He drove a 1935 Ford Coupe. Joe Ricker introduced Dad to her. She had been dating Joe, and he left her for Norma. So, they had wonderful memories. She said Buddy's the one that taught her how to drive after they were married. She learned on the 35 Ford Coupe that made a lot of noise. So there's a lot. First time Mama had to drive by herself on her own was when Dad had to go to the doctor because a natural gas blew up in his face. He had been trying to keep the water tank from freezing. So anyway, lots of fun memories. Well, not only did Ruby and Buddy have interesting lives, but when Buddy married Ruby, he got twin sister in a sense as well. Reba and Corky became, of course, good friends. When you marry a twin, you marry into that relationship as well. I do understand Ruby was the older one by 2 hours and bigger at birth. Her mother told of how she'd put them both in the same bed since they couldn't afford two beds, and Reba wasn't gaining any weight until finally Mom caught Ruby stealing Reba's bottle and drinking it too. But the two of them had a very special relationship, and that was very true of Buddy and Ruby and Reba and Corky. What a unique relationship. Twins share something very special, and in this family, one of the things they shared was their own children, and all the kids have such special relationships. But here at church, we knew the Waller girls. Not I didn't back in those days. I came later than that, but they were a very special group of girls. Mary Watson, who can't be here today, I was talking to her on the phone, and she reflected how Ruby was so good to keep up with all the older folks that had been in Edmond all their life. And if Mary couldn't remember someone from the old days, all you had to do was call and ask Ruby. As Mary said, she had such a good memory of those who had gone before and spoke of them in love. What a wonderful heritage. Well, at Edmond Church of Christ, we consider her one who has gone before. And so this is our time to speak of her in love as well. The church has so many memories of Ruby and Reba, along with Laura and their mom, who the church affectionately called Sister Waller. Reba did so much here at church. She helped with missions, those mission trips to Mexico, Monday night for the Master, for our meals for funerals, potlucks. She'd often call around and get food to help people. And some of her recipes are some of the most famous ones in our church cookbook. She loved ladies' Bible class. She just loved the Lord's church. And she was a part of something here at Edmond called the Birthday Group. It's a group of ladies at church that would get together, and she was a part of the original group of ladies. That original group included Reba, Ruby, Donella Wheat, Janie Mauser, Mary Smith, Betty Greenhaw, and then later Mary Watson and others. They would give silly cards and laugh and have so much fun, and she enjoyed those times. As Mary said, all of us at church knew her love for her family. She was so proud of each one of you, and we all knew it. Mary also remembers her talking about her love of gardening with Buddy and how she canned a lot back in those days, and how she was very proud of a coffee table made from the front door of the old house where she grew up. James Crowder, our church historian, summed up Ruby with one word, and I think it's a very good word that describes all of us here at church. He described her as perky. And she is a special lady and makes us all smile as we remember her. God gave you a very special gift in her life, and He gave us a very special blessing in our lives. And may we carry forward that legacy of faithfulness, love, compassion, and fruits of the Spirit into our days ahead. But we are very mindful of the last days as well. Maybe this psalm brings some peace to the moment. Psalm 107, He stilled the storm to a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed. They were glad when it grew calm, and He guided them to their haven of rest. Let's pray. Dear God, it's with full hearts that we come and thank You so much for the many wonderful blessings You've poured into our lives. And since You're the one that made us, You know us as no one else does. And so You know those feelings of love and appreciation and gratitude. You also understand the spirit of sadness and emptiness that might be felt at a time like this as well. Father, we're so thankful for this moment and this time to remember this good life. And more than just a moment of remembering, we're thankful for the wonderful memories that we can cherish and carry with us into the future. Father, there's many things that will be forgotten, but may one truth always live on in this church family, in this family, and in this world. A truth that she believed in so strongly. And that is, You love us, You sent Your Son to die for us, so that we could be forever family in heaven someday. And it's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Born of His Spirit, washed in His blood.
From the time Mom entered this earth, she was a twin. She was born with a best friend. Not many of us can say that. And they were inseparable, like we talked about earlier. And we were going through all the pictures. It was amazing that, we didn't find a whole lot that were just Mom. Usually it entailed Reba and Mom. So we know they were very tight. They were very close. And I believe that being a twin helped to form Mom into the person that she was. Kind, giving, loyal, and someone who always put everyone first. She had to learn to share and put others first. And such as I know, if I remember sharing correctly, my Aunt Reba was sick there for a while, and my mom and Reba weren't even able to graduate the same year because Reba had been sick. And I know that had to have been hard, probably not to be able to share that experience together. So I know from that time on that they were always there for each other. They helped each other out. They were dependent on each other. And then you have my Aunt Laura, too, who came down with polio and was crippled at an early age. And I remember those many years that Mom always and Reba took care of Aunt Laura. There was many days when we would leave church and we would go pick up Laura, and bring her over to the house, and we would provide meals for her and constantly going and checking on her. So from the time my mom was young, she took on these responsibilities. She took on this being a best friend and being a caregiver and being that big sister and young sister and taking care of those who are in her family and their needs. I wanted to bring up in a moment, too, about my grandmother Waller, because I think my grandmother Waller also set who my mother was. My grandmother, and many of y'all may not know, my grandfather passed away when my mom was 7, so my grandmother raised my mother at a very young age, all the kids. And I know my mom never went without any needs. And Grandma Waller, just like my mom was, she was very strong. She always put family first, and she was very hardworking. She was faithful, and she was a very good steward of money. She was also a good seamstress and a good cook. I don't have a lot of memories of my grandmother Waller when I was younger, but I do remember a few things. And when I look back on Mom, I see all those characteristics, just like my grandmother Waller. My mom would talk about her and the things that she did. And I know that those are, because of my grandmother Waller, my mom also professed a lot of those same qualities. And I'm thankful for that, because hopefully some of those things I feel like have been passed down to the next generation. So sometimes we forget and we don't see it till later on what things, how our family has such an impact on us and what we learn from them and how important they are. Some things to remember my mom about was that she was a very religious person. Religion was very important to her. She never missed unless when she was sick or the weather was to where she couldn't come. She never missed a contribution. She was always volunteering. She was constantly making her snickerdoodles for Bible class, for a vacation Bible school or mission trip, doing sewing when it was needed. She was always there and helping in whichever way she could. She was hardworking, just like I was saying my grandmother Waller. My dad was. She was hardworking. She stood by my dad and everything he did. She constantly was working to help others, whether it was a family member or a church member. And it was kind of funny because I was also thinking about all the times that she worked so hard. I know Annette would probably agree there was many times that she would say, well, I'm just going to go lay down. I just need 20 minutes. And she would even set that little timer because she would just have that little cat nap. And then she would feel good again and ready to go. Also, loyalty was something that really stuck out about my mom, especially as a wife. She was a very loyal wife. She stood by my dad in everything from thick and thin. She was always there. She helped him. She managed the money. She helped him even behind the counter at his business. And she kept the books. And I don't know if y'all ever knew this about my mom, but she had immaculate books. Everything was... Her penmanship was perfect. Everything was in order. She made sure everything balanced. She had those ledgers that, I mean, it was amazing. I look back on it, and I can't imagine how she was able to do all that. She was also loyal to her sisters, Laura and Reba, and to her friends like Zella, Nance, and Carmen Reed, and many others, and to her church family. So loyalty is something that I felt that she was very strong in. She was also a very good steward of money. She managed the money for my dad, and it was kind of funny. I mean, some of y'all may even had family members since they grew up in Depression. She'd often hide in she had her little can that she'd put her kitty, what she would call it, and it was kind of interesting because if she needed something or wanted to do something special, she could just go get her money out of her little kitty. And so that was always, I thought, kind of interesting fact. When we were going through things, after a certain point, we just never threw anything away, so we went through it because we were like, we never know what they had put away. She was a great seamstress. I have a lot of memories of when I was in high school taking home ec, and I remember struggling some there for a while, and Mom would sit down on the floor in the living room, and we would take the pattern and we would lay it out, and she had to make sure it was perfect, and she would tell me, you can't have any wrinkles, and everything had to be pinned just right, and it had to go to a certain direction. And the other thing, she always wanted to make sure you have to follow those directions. If you don't follow those directions, so it was just, I still have that vivid memory of sitting in there in the living room on the floor and her teaching me how to sew and what had to be done and making sure that everything was just right. And although, you can see out there, she was a great seamstress. She even made those quilts at a young age, which is something that my grandmother had passed down. My grandmother had passed down to her too. And then again, has been brought up several times, is her cooking. I can remember when she would cook a roast, I would ask her, well, why are you doing this? Just like browning the roast. Well, it seals in the juices. So guess what? Still today, when I make a roast, I do just like Mom did. And also the cherry pie. Pies were a big thing in our family, and I think, if I'm correct, Grandma Waller had also taught her how to do that. Well, she passed that down to my sister and my cousin Sharon, who's like a sister, and I can remember those days. In fact, later in the life, Mom would say, oh, you do better than me, but just don't ever forget who taught you how to make those pies. So, I'm so thankful for that, because she taught me that. And the calculator, wow. I know Annette can remember this. When she was working on her book, she had that 10-key calculator, and her fingers moved, her little skinny fingers could move so fast on that thing, and I'm like, I don't know how you do that. In fact, she tried to teach me one time, and I never could get quite like she did. And counting money. I remember my first job was at Brahms. And she told me, you cannot go work at Brahms unless you know how to count that money back. So she sat down, she taught me how to count money back, because she felt that was very important, that I knew how to count money back when somebody bought something. Because, even then, they didn't have the cash registers that told you how much to give back. You had to be able to count it back. So she made sure I knew how to do that. And directions, Annette, we know this, and Sharon probably, Mom was one with directions. Every time we would go anywhere, what would she say? Go north, this mountain, go south, go east. And I remember they said, Mom, just say left or right. And even those later years when her memory was fading, she still would say, well, which direction are we going? Are we going right? Are we going west? Or now we're going east? And so that was always very important to her. And gardening, oh my gosh, her garden was absolutely beautiful. It's amazing. In fact, this last year is the first time I was actually able, I know Annette is a lot more successful with her gardens than I am, but I actually got tomatoes to grow. And in my mind, I kept thinking, oh my gosh, if Mom could only see these tomatoes and taste them, and she would be so proud of me. She was great at it. And in fact, she'd have this huge compost pile. I remember when we would sit at the dinner table, nothing went to waste. There was always a pile here that would go like food scraps or something that the deer would be able to eat, and then there would be a pile here that went to her compost. And every time after she'd get ready to get her garden ready for the next season, Dad would take his plow and would move it over, and then he would till it. And I honestly believe that was probably why she had such a beautiful garden, was because of her wonderful compost. Her canning, man. It was amazing. In fact, my best friend Jill, when she would come, it's amazing. She was like, "Oh, I hope your mom will give me some canned green beans." She loved my mom's canned green beans. They were so special to her. And Richard and his pickles, which I'm sure probably is going to mention that. And some of the final things of Mom's memories for me was, I can remember when I was in school in elementary, she'd come pick me up if I had a dental appointment or a doctor's appointment or something, and we'd go eat at Long John Silver's, of all places, but we loved Long John Silver's. And then laying my head in her lap and rubbing my head. She would lay there and rub my head and play with my hair, and it just felt so good. And then also camp. Many of y'all know Camp Impact was this very special part, and for years I did crafts, and I'd bring stuff home, and she would set up tables out on the patio, and she would help me and do whatever. Everything would be in piles and neatly stacked, and she was just amazing in that aspect, always there. You know, when I think in our years after we moved home, Mom would call, and she'd always afraid of calling because she'd be always afraid that she was interrupting our family time or anything, and she was always apologetic. You know, when we moved her to San Antonio after my dad passed away, I was kind of scared about that. But, you know, I think God had a plan. He blessed us in many ways with some special family members that we got to know, like Jimmy and Melissa and Eleanor and Karen, and then the caregivers at Franklin and at Colonial Gardens. They were awesome. I thank them so much, Julie and Jacob and Sylvia, Veronica, Maria, and there's so many, and the hospice nurse. I'm so thankful for them. And you know, when the caregivers shared a lot of times Mom, as we said, can't set her feistiness. Well, her feistiness, yes, her smiles and her kisses. Mom loved to eat, and they would take her to the dining room, and she would kind of want to be independent eating. This was later when she was needing some help, and she'd kind of get all mad and knock the table and get upset with them, and then she'd turn to him and she'd say, "I'm sorry," and then they'd say, "We love you, Rue. I love you too." And so they were so understanding, and I'm so thankful. And I told her, I said, "You ever see, if she ever winks at you, you know, she likes you." And it was kind of funny too, and later in life, as she got to where she was in a wheelchair, she'd be going down the wheel hutch, and she'd just pat him on the bottom, and which was something I never thought Mom would have ever done. So it was kind of interesting. They just go on, and I'd be there seeing her, and she'd motion for them to come over, and she'd give them kisses on the hands. I'm like, what about me, you know? So they loved her and adored her, and for so many reasons we know. In her last hours, when I got to be with her that day, I can remember them coming in saying, you know, she can hear you. You need to talk to her and tell her it's okay to go. And so that's what I did. I reminded her it was okay. You know, Reba was waiting for her, and Dad was waiting for her, and Laura and all her family was waiting for her, and that it was okay. And I sit there and caressed her head just like she did for me for many years. And like Annette did such a good job writing her obituary, and the thing that we talked about mostly that she said was, is there anything I can do for you? Do you need any help? Do you need anything? And even in those days when her memory was gone and she was older, that was something she always still asked was, is there anything I can do for you? I have a quick poem that I wrote, and this was several years ago, and Richard had helped me write it. It says, "My mom, warm and kind in heart, with numbers you're so smart. A great friend always to your twin, your pies are always a win. A grandma to your 6, you taught your girls how to stitch. Your baking is such a delight, cherry pies are just right. You can make your garden grow and can the vegetables we know. You give and share with those in need, a follower of Jesus indeed." And the last thing I'd like to do is, our daughter Casey was not able to be here, and she did write something that I was going to share. Grandmother, growing up, you made a house a home. The cousins and I always count on a home-cooked meal with Brahms ice cream for dessert. You knew my love language and cuddled me close while gently combing through my hair. Years passed and your memory would start to fade. I got the pleasure of being near you in college days. You might ask me about the cinnamon roll 3 times, but I didn't care. I got to know the stories of your past and greatness of my great-grandma. You could point out where you grew up, where you went to church, and where even Reba and you were born. I never will forget the stories told. Days passed and your needs grew greater, but you never stopped making me smile. Your love was contagious. I will miss your wink and smile. I know you are so happy to see your sisters, Grandpa, and your mother. Love you and miss you. Your granddaughter, Casey.
A couple more things that family members wrote down from Sharon Britt. My Aunt Ruby was my favorite aunt. She was my mom's twin sister and my second mom. Aunt Ruby was a wonderful cook and always had a garden. She did lots of canning, but her dill pickles were my favorite. Sharon, I would say the sweet pickles were my favorite. The very best pickles I've ever had. Aunt Ruby sometimes took care of me in the morning before school. I had long, very thick hair, and I hated to brush it. Before we left for school, she would call me into the bathroom to check my hair. She would pull my hair up, and she could brush underneath, which would hurt because it always had lots of tangles. When she finished, she would always say, "Now doesn't that feel better?" When I was a lot older, she loved to remind me with a smile on her face about how much I loved to have my hair, how much I loved to have her brush my hair, and then she would laugh. How blessed I was to grow up with a mother and a second mother. And then Andrew McKeever, one of Ruby's grandsons, wrote this. When I remember Grandma, I think of the good times we had together, and they often were centered around food. I'd like to think she's experiencing a meal far better and more loving than anything she has ever prepared on earth. Rest in peace, Grandma Mays. The banquet is ready. Hooray, hooray. Mashed potatoes heaped up high, canned green beans, oh my, oh my. Don't forget the roast, of course. Fresh baked rolls, pick up every morsel. Don't be discouraged because that's not all. Pie's in the oven, and it won't take long. Rest in peace, Grandma Mays. The match is set and on its way. The game is short. It's been your mission. You've run the race as a champion. Not for a crown made by man, but for a crown that will forever stand. After this next hymn, we'll watch a video salute to Ruby.
He leadeth me, O blessed thought, O words with heavenly comfort fraught. Whate'er I do, where'er I be, still 'tis God's hand that leadeth me. He leadeth me by his own hand. He leadeth me. His faithful follower I would be, for by his hand he leadeth me. Sometimes mid scenes of deepest gloom, sometimes where Eden's bowers bloom, by water still or troubled sea, still 'tis his hand that leadeth me. He leadeth me by his own hand. He leadeth me. His faithful follower I would be, for by his hand he leadeth me. Lord, I would clasp thy hand in mine, nor ever murmur nor repine, content whatever lot I see, since 'tis thy hand that leadeth me. He leadeth me by his own hand. He leadeth me. His faithful follower I would be, for by his hand he leadeth me. And when my task on earth is done, when by thy grace the victory's won, in death's cold wave I will Jordan leadeth me. He leadeth me by his own hand. He leadeth me. His faithful follower I would be, for by his hand he leadeth me.
What will it be like when my pain is gone and all the worries of this world just fade away? What will it be like when you call my name, in that moment when I'll see you face to face? I'm waiting my whole life to hear you say, well done, my good and faithful one. Welcome to the place where you belong. Well done, my beloved child. You have run the race, and now you're home. Welcome to the place where you belong. What will it be like when tears are washed away and every broken thing will finally be made whole? What will it be like when I come into your glory, standing in the presence of a love so beautiful? I'm waiting my whole life for that day. I will live my life to hear you say, well done, my good and faithful one. Welcome to the place where you belong. Well done, my beloved child. You have run the race, and now you're home. Welcome to the place where you belong. What will it be like when I hear that sound? All of heaven's angels crying out, singing, holy, holy, holy are you, Lord. Singing, waiting my whole life for that day. Until then I'll live to hear you say, well done, my good and faithful one. Welcome to the place where you belong. Well done, my beloved child. You have run the race, and now you're home. If I had only known the last time would be the last time, I would have put off all the things I had to do. I would have stayed a little longer, held on a little tighter. Now what I'd give for one more day with you. There's a wound here in my heart where something's missing, and they tell me that it's gonna heal with time. But I know you're in a place where all your wounds have been erased, and knowing yours are healed is healing mine. The only scars in heaven that won't belong to me. There'll be no such thing as broken, and all the old will be made new, and the thought that makes me smile now, even as the tears fall down, is that the only scars in heaven are on the hands that hold you now. Your share of scars along the way. Oh, but now you're standing in the sun. You fought your fight and your races run. The pain is all a million miles away. The only scars in heaven that won't belong to me and you. There'll be no such thing as broken. And all the old will be made new, and the thought that makes me smile now, even as the tears fall down, is that the only scars in heaven, yeah, are on the hands that hold you now. Not a day goes by that I don't see you. You live on in all the better parts of me. Until I'm standing with you in the sun, I'll fight this fight and this race I'll run, until I finally see what you can see. Oh, the only scars in heaven such things broken, and all the old will be made new, and the thought that makes me smile now, and even as the tears fall down, is that the only scars in heaven are on the hands that hold you now.
Wife, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, whom we deeply loved. We knew this day was approaching. And you know what? 91 years is a long run. And it doesn't take the sting of the loss away from us, but we know that she knew Psalms 116:15 very well and believed it. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his faithful servants. Faithful she had been. For all that knew Ruby would know how much she loved Jesus and she loved his church. She loved worshiping. The church had a special place in her heart, and in fact, this church had a very special place in her heart. And while she lived in San Antonio these last few years, Annette and Janet gave her a CD player, and she would listen to worship songs over and over again. She loved serving others, and Edmond Church was one place she loved doing that. I know particularly she was fond of helping out and helping support the youth group and those that were on college mission trips here. Hebrews 10:23 says, "Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful." Ruby spent her life on this earth holding unswervingly to this hope that she professed. We are filled with much comfort today because she is home. Janet's already mentioned that even in Ruby's fading years, she was a shining example to everyone. My mother-in-law embodied gentleness and kindness for all. When we walked out of Franklin the other day, her last day in the place that she lived, one of the residents was comforting my wife, and he read Revelation 21:5 to her. He was seated on the throne, and said, "I am making all things new." And then he said, "Write this down, for these things are trustworthy and true." And later that night, Janet and I listened to a song that had these words: "Only you can bring such beauty from the depths of all my pain. Only you can take the shattered heart and make it beat again. Only you can hold us all together in your hands. I surrender all I have and all I am. You make all things new. You make all things new. God of mercy and love, do only what you can do. You make all things new." I think there's one thing that our whole family can agree on, is that Alzheimer's is a terrible disease. And we have so much comfort knowing that Ruby can remember now, that she's whole again, and Jesus is making all things new. You know, over the last few years, Janet would spend most afternoons with her mom. I remember so many times, but probably not enough, asking, "How's your mom today?" And most days I didn't really need an answer because I could see the look on her face, because there was days when Mom knew who she was and days she wasn't quite sure. But one thing I know for sure is Alzheimer's for Ruby is no more. Now she is without pain or suffering, without the fog of Alzheimer's separating those from the ones that she loved. Now she's at peace and rest, surrounded by the love of God. And Ruby loved her kids, and she loved her grandkids. And most of you, in fact, none of you would know this picture that is etched in my mind of Ruby. But when my oldest son, Caleb, was about 10 months old, he was hospitalized for meningitis. And both set of grandparents came to support us during those 14 days in the hospital. And one night, one of those very first nights when I walked into our house from the hospital, I caught Ruby on her knees praying with her hands folded just like a picture-perfect prayer. And she had been praying for my son. And I'm guessing today that she's still talking to Jesus on all of our behalfs. She prayed for her grandkids so much. If I told you one word that I would describe Ruby to me, it would be gentle. Philippians 4:5, "Let your gentleness be evident to all, for the Lord is near." In Ruby's gentleness, she could always get things done, though. I think it was when Janet and I first got engaged, and I can't remember where we were, but I was probably helping her carry something in the garden. I think she was trying to give me a word of encouragement. I'm not sure if it was a word of encouragement or warning, but, Ruby could kind of tell you. And she said, Janet's got some of her dad's stubbornness in her. I didn't know what that meant, not till later. She asked me the question, "Are you up for the challenge?" And she said it in just such a gentle way. And of course, I said, "Yes, I love your daughter." One of the things that I wish I would have told her was, your daughter has so much of you in her. Ruby shared what she had with those that were in need, always serving and giving and doing to others, and most of the time, we never knew. She was so proud of her grandkids, all of them. And if you think about it, from Heather to Cameron, that's quite a spread in years. Grandma was always going to send you a birthday gift, which usually had a check in it, and sometimes it even had a savings bond that you could use for later, because she was going to make sure you were financially responsible. You know, when Kent and I directed Camp Impact, and I first moved to San Antonio, we didn't know what to do with my 30 or 40 campers on Saturday night during orientation, so my mother-in-law would host all those 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders at her house for 3 and 4 hours on Saturday night. They would cook out hot dogs and play games. She never complained about having the kids at her house. She loved having them there. I can't believe I ever did that to her. Faithful, gentleness, and kind are just a few words in Ruby's life. If Ruby would get it done, whatever needed to be done, she worked hard, she worked smart. Yeah, and Janet said earlier, she never learned Excel, but if you looked at her ledgers, she didn't need Excel. Remember when we were first married and we needed a car, Buddy decided that he would loan me the money for the car at a lower interest rate than I could get at the bank. If you borrow money from your father-in-law, especially this father-in-law, you're going to pay it back quickly. But every month as we sent the payment in, we would get this handwritten receipt, and it was picture perfect, like it had been typed out every month until that loan was paid off from Ruby. Yes, and Janet did mention when I was in college and we were dating, Ruby would sneak jars of bread and butter pickles into my car. I have to admit that I did eat some of those jars just on the way back to the dorm so that I wouldn't have to share them with my roommates. And even after we were married, every time we go to the house, I would leave her house with a jar of bread and butter pickles. And you haven't tasted anything until you taste Ruby's bread and butter pickles. Every once in a while, Ruby could just tell you how she felt about something by just sharing with you straightforward, but sometimes it was kind of subtle. And so every once in a while, as I was going through my first few years of ministry, she would find a favorite sermon that some preacher in Oklahoma would preach, and she'd send me a cassette tape. And she'd tell me I needed to listen to it. And most of the time I listened to it. And that was her way of saying, I just want you to hear what this guy's saying. So glad that Ruby's heart just magnified gentleness and peace. And I am so glad that she is at rest in the presence of Jesus now. And I'm so glad that she is being made new. We are thankful for the many godly lessons Ruby has taught her kids, her grandkids, family, and friends. Thank you, Ruby, Mom, Grandma, and friend. Let's pray together. Father, in your presence we come to you today so grateful for the Spirit that dwells inside of your people. And we ask for comfort in the loss as we find much peace in knowing that your servant Ruby is at peace in your presence. Thank you for the memories we continue to share of this beautiful lady whom you have used to share goodness and love to so many. In Jesus' name, amen.